And for more insight, let's bring in Soonman Kwon, Professor of Health Economics and Policy School of Public Health, Seoul National University. And he joins us live from Seoul. Well, thanks for joining us, Professor Kwon. So the government has to resort to these legal means to break the strike. We know that the young doctors are facing suspension or prosecution by end of February, which means tomorrow. And a small number of doctors has returned to work. Can we expect more tomorrow?
Actually, it's hard to expect. I mean, if government really go ahead and file legal suit, then that means that about 70–80% of those trained doctors will be filed suit. Then that means that majority of those teaching or tertiary care hospitals will face huge difficulties. So, I mean, it's hard to predict what will happen really tomorrow, the deadline that government proposed.
It's certainly hard to predict, but we do know that the South Korean government is standing firm, right, on their medical reforms, and on top of that, there's strong public support at 80%. Are there any hints of potential compromise or resolution at some point to this strike?
Yeah, one of the difficulties to make it more difficult to predict is that, two perspectives. One is the President Yoon's kind of a personal style and the reputation, that once he is determined, he has a reputation to go ahead, really to determine to make it. Second factor, I think is more important factor, is that overall so far, this government is not very popular. The popularity rate has been quite low. However, this policy turns out to be quite popular. I mean, more than 70% or 80%. I mean, the majority of the population support this policy. So it turns out that this is one of the very few examples of popular policy from this very unpopular government. And there will be a general election in April. So it will be very difficult for this government to take some steps back. In contrast to the previous governments, that also many of those previous governments tried to increase the supply of doctors, but facing the physician strikes, especially the strikes of the trainee doctors, they always gave up. But this government, both of the leadership style plus a political context, make it more difficult, and it is possible that government will go ahead and really introduce this reform.
And I can imagine why it's a popular policy. I mean, for the average Korean out there, we hear about them being turned away, from various hospitals. It must be a very distressing situation for the people there. But in terms of the root cause, though, I mean, the government's got their point of view. The doctors, they're framing all these issues differently. But Professor, can you pinpoint for us, what are some of the underlying healthcare system issues that's actually causing this current crisis that actually require urgent reforms?
Basically, it is not just a shortage of doctors in some specific essential service areas. In my view, as a health economist, I think that there's an overall undersupply or excess demand or undersupply of doctors in almost all specialty areas, except for some like cosmetic things. And as a result, there are still huge access issues for patient, and plus the doctor's income as a percentage of a ordinary industrial employee income, that difference is one of the highest in the world. I mean, in Korea, for example, average doctors earn about more than 4 or 5 times that of those ordinary employees, whereas that number is usually 2 or 3 times in OECD countries. So both from this, the limited access to essential healthcare, plus there is kind of increasing consensus that this limited supply and the monopolization in the medical market results in a overcompensation for doctors, and it may, in the long run, it may threaten the fiscal sustainability of the overall healthcare system.
And how so, if you could elaborate on that? I mean, we know that the South Korean doctors, as you've mentioned, they're among the best paid globally. In fact, I think they're paid about $200,000 a year. But the economic consequences, though, that could arise from the government's plan for current and future doctors, and not to mention that, you know, Korea is also having to deal with this aging population and a declining birth rate.
You're right. So the limited access to healthcare will be exaggerated. I mean, it will be more and more of the serious issues because Korean population is rapidly aging. As you know, the aged people, they need healthcare much more than the average, younger generation. So facing this one of the most rapidly aging society, we need the demand for doctor services is very rapidly increasing. So that will be another factor that affect the more and more serious issues of limited access to essential health care.
And Professor, just before I let you go, just very quickly, in terms of the long-term sustainability, the government, they plan to increase the medical school admissions to address this problem. Is it viable? I mean, are there alternative solutions that should be prioritized?
I think that the increase in the number of admissions to medical school is not a panacea. But without increasing the medical school admissions, without increasing the number of doctor supply, all the other government approach, the policy cannot work. So in other words, this increase in the doctors or increasing the admissions to medical school is a kind of necessary condition. I mean, without the increase in medical doctors, we can never solve the distribution issues. I mean, urban, rural, or essential or non-essential the healthcare services. So I think, as I just mentioned, it cannot solve everything, but it will be the most important first step that government should act on. Otherwise, those other issues cannot be solved.
All right. Thanks for making those crucial points there, Professor Soonman Kwon, Professor of Health Economics and Policy, School of Public Health from Seoul National University.